Good evening, everybody. Happy Saturday to everybody. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Saturday. I hope that you guys are enjoying yourselves today and that you're relaxing and getting a little bit of R&R in. Welcome to my channel. My name is 12 Gauge. If you're new here, please do me a favor and subscribe if you enjoy the content. If you've been here before, thank you for continuing to come by and give my page some love. You know what I mean? Um, Tonight I'm going to talk about the beehive mentality. Are we really followers until we die? I'm going to go over some physiological stuff to understand the way we react the way that we do and how we do the things that we do. Sometimes it's not as simple and cut and dry as we believe that, you know, um, I just react the way I do because that's who I am. You know, if you have that type of mentality, whoa, I got some sun today. If you have that mentality and you don't dig a little deeper than the surface level, sometimes you sell yourself short. And that's what the beehive mentality is. It's about doing the same thing over and over, just feeling that this is enough to to get you by. So let me pull up some videos. And while I'm doing that, I want to remind you guys that, these videos are educational in the sense that it assists people into change, it assists them into understanding the situations in life that are going on sometimes. And you might not be the one that needs to change. You might know somebody who's struggling, somebody who's having a lot of issues, and they don't know how to deal with it. So if you become knowledgeable on how to help, you might be able to save somebody from going down that dark path. You know, it's hard to face this world alone. It's hard to believe that at times that nobody cares, nobody understands us. It's time to get to that point where you have um, that understanding that you're not alone and that you can make it through this as long as you continue to empower yourself and to be able to address the issues that you need to address, if that makes sense. So let's start with the hive mentality or the hive mind.
Lunchtime can be stressful. With limited time, too many options, at risk of going hungry. It's surprising that our minds don't cave under the pressure. But how do we reach a decision? We are not the only species faced with a tough decision. During spring, tens of thousands of bees leave the colony due to overcrowding or bad conditions. The bees gather to debate where to live, exposing the colony to the elements.
It's like a glob. It's like this big ball of bees, and they cling to each other in these chains all the way down. Everybody just grabs onto one another into these chains, and so it almost looks fluid. They're often attracted by the scent of the queen, so the location of the queen will draw those individuals so that they are swarming around her. It's not a good place to be in a swarm if you're a bee. It can take maybe a couple days to up to a week, perhaps, to find the right spot. Some bees may not have that potential. If the weather starts to turn, they might have to pick a suboptimal spot. Or in some cases, the colony splits because they can't reach a decision fast enough. Typically, the colony dies if they don't reach a consensus.
But how does the colony agree? Scouts are sent out to find potential new homes. Once they find a site, they return to propose their location using dance.
They'll return back to the colony and they'll begin to do a waggle dance, very similar to the waggle dance that's performed when they find a good food source. The only difference is instead of dancing using the vertical of the comb, they're using the individuals, the swarm, as their dance floor, and individuals are following the dance. So what the followers of the dance have to do is they have to determine which dance they're going to follow, or whether they're going to choose to follow a different dance or not follow any dance at all.
The waggle dance communicates the location of the site. The length of the waggle shows how far away the nest is. The angle that the bee dances on the swarm is the direction of the nest in relation to the sun. Imagine bee voting taking place in the dance club. If a bee likes a location, it will dance to recruit others to check it out. If the other bees agree, they will begin to copy the dance until the entire colony is dancing the same dance. But how do all the bees agree?
One of the really interesting and beautiful things that these bees do is, like people, they have this idea on how the world works, and they have something that they want to fight for and argue for. But unlike people, bees recognize that when the quality of their argument has run out, they stop and they listen.
For a stubborn bee, a simple butt to the side can stop it from dancing.
Once everybody on the nest is dancing towards the same nest site, then all of the bees just stop and they all fly off straight in that directions to the nest. Because bees are using this system, the whole group is ending up at these optimal situations in the optimal cavity. And so there are huge benefits to being able to work together like this.
So basically, what they're saying is, whenever we're in a situation, we get up, we go to work, we come home, and we're programmed. We're programmed to continue doing what we do every day. As long as we're all moving in the same direction, we're all seeming to be progressing in life, moving toward the same goal. But once one person or one bee starts stopping what they're doing, it influences the rest of the bees.
Yes.
But how does this relate to lunch?
It's really complicated to try to disassociate the individual from the colony. The same thing is true for brains. When we look at a brain, it's hard to dissect the brain and to understand the role of each neuron, but we can do that with a social insect colony.
The swarm is like an exposed brain, with each honeybee behaving very similar to neurons. Neurons are cells in the brain in charge of transmitting information. For a decision to be reached, certain neurons need to be activated and others need to stop transmitting. Otherwise, a decision can't be made. Luckily today, this isn't the case.
So I know that that's kind of confusing, but I want you to think of it in a sense that kind of like here on these YouTube streets, we have clicks that follow the negativity. Like one person starts on one person, then another person jumps in, another person jumps in, and it's not like they're very individualistic. They're very they're followers, just like the bees, you know. And when that happens, it continues going until something breaks the cycle. And obviously, the positivity would be them going to start dancing again and being happy. But first, all this is gonna make sense by the video that I'm playing tonight and my explanation. Right now, it's kind of, you're probably going, what's he on? Did he get too much sun today? No, I didn't get too much sun today. There is a process to my madness. True. Well, here is the next video that shows what I'm talking about as far as classical conditioning, and this is Pavlov's dog. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but this is a behavior theory that was taught by using a dog in food. It's very interesting, and if you look at how individuals in society are, it's almost the same thing. You can start talking about certain things, and just by the thought of it, you start salivating. And once like when it's lunchtime, usually you're looking at the clock, you start getting hungry, and you go and get food.
Classical conditioning is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that then results in the same reaction. The most famous work in classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. One day during his research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs began to salivate in the presence of the technician who normally fed them. He wondered if the technician was a trigger that stimulated a response associated with food. To find out, he constructed an experiment that would allow him to measure a dog's output of saliva. First, he served the dog food. Then, he served food while playing the sounds of a metronome and repeated the process a few times. Finally, he removed the food and only played the metronome. The dogs began to salivate in response to the metronome alone. Pavlov concluded that if a new stimulus was present when the dog was given food, then that stimulus became associated with food and caused salivation on its own. When he published his findings, Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response. He also reported that 1. Learning occurred most rapidly when the interval between the sound and the appearance of the food was short. 2. The saliva produced by the sound differed in composition from that produced by the food, which means that the conditioned response.
So whenever the dog hears the pendulum sound, starts salivating. So at that point, he's looking for the food. So if you ever swing the pendulum, the dog hears the pendulum, but there's no food, is he going to salivate or is he not going to salivate? This is the experiment here. And the reason I'm talking about this is because as humans, we do the same thing. Sometimes, we get stuck in behaviors that we're triggered by certain things in our lives, and we don't understand why we start to react to stimuli that's not even present. We could think of an event that happened. We start to get stressed out about it. And all of a sudden, our body goes into fight or flight, and we don't understand why we were just calm a minute ago. And now we're going into fight or flight over a thought. So, this is the same kind of conditioning that we conditioned ourselves. Even though we're not a dog, we can have any kind of stimuli that triggers an emotional attachment to us, and we start to react to it, either positively or negatively.
Was not an exact replica of the unconditioned response. 3. While there are several forms of conditioning, such as forward and backward conditioning, classical conditioning cannot create new behavior or be used for training, but instead triggers involuntary biological responses. 4. We can almost entirely undo the conditioning. This happens through extinction, when we repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. So, what occurs inside the brain? When a dog sees the food, the signals from the eyes and nose stimulate the brain, which activates the salivation glands to secrete saliva to aid the dog with the digestion. When a dog hears a sound, the ears send a signal to the brain, which takes note but has no reason to activate anything. When the two different neurological processes are being activated simultaneously, new synaptic connections occur between the auditory stimulus and the behavioral response. Over time, these synapses are strengthened so that it only takes the sound to activate the pathway leading to salivation. You can try this popular classroom exercise. Take a friend, sit down and relax for 2 minutes. Then allow your partner to check and record your pulse rate. Your partner will then tap a pencil on the desk 5 times. Right after, stand up and hop on one leg for 30 seconds and then check your pulse again. Repeat the procedure 4 times, having the partner record all data. After relaxing for the 5th time, your partner will tap the pencil 5 times as usual. Now, instead of getting up for your exercise, only check your pulse. If the conditioning was successful, your pulse rate will rise even without engaging in exercise. What do you think? Does classical conditioning always work? If so, are commercials a form of mental manipulation, and should we limit advertising in public spaces?
Interesting, right? So we're kind of conditioned.
Sprouts videos are published under the Creative Commons license. That means our videos are free and anyone.
Hold on a second. Let me get to the other video that I wanted to show. But I was saying with Pavlov's dog, we're not a dog, but we condition ourselves the same way that a dog does. Whether it be with food, whether it be with gambling, whether it be with life events, whatever it is, we condition ourselves to respond to stimuli. So think about that on these YouTube streets. All you have to see is a negative or a picture of somebody in a negative light, and all of a sudden you're drawn to that because all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, all right, we're about to hear some juicy stuff about this person. And it's not always some good things, it's not always good things that we hear, but yet we've already committed. So it's hard to differentiate between the two. Dogs are really smart. I don't know if you know that, but they really are. And they're able to learn very quickly on different levels. And that's why they're used in experiments a lot of time in order to teach behavior and understand behavior because they're able to replicate certain things that we replicate as humans. And maybe that's why we get along with them so well. Maybe that's why they say a dog is a man's best friend. Well, this is the difference between classical and operant conditioning. I just told you what classical was. This is operant. So it's different. Okay. So we're about to learn the difference. Let me share the screen first. God, I'm sunburnt and I'm not thinking. I believe that, Heather. I really do. You can just see his eyes and you can see that he understands a lot. Like when you take a picture of him, you can see his eyes are really focused on you. They're focused on you. What is she doing? Why is she, she's asking me to be this way. So I love this human. So let me make her happy. And I'm sure you smile when your dog makes you happy, right? So that is the stimulus plus the reward.
When we think about learning, we often picture students in a classroom or lecture hall, books open on their desk, listening intently to a teacher or professor in the front of the room. But in psychology, learning means something else. To psychologists, learning is a long-term change in behavior that's based on experience. Two of the main types of learning are called classical conditioning and operant or instrumental conditioning. Let's talk about classical conditioning first. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. After a while, the dogs would associate the bell with the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they would get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dogs salivate. They learned to expect food at the sound of a bell. You see, under normal conditions, the sight and smell of food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call salivation an unconditioned response. Nobody trains a dog to salivate over some steak. However, when we pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral, like the sound of a bell, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. And so classical conditioning was discovered. We see how this works with animals, but how does it work with humans? In exactly the same way. Let's say that one day you go to the doctor to get a shot. She says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit," and then gives you the most painful shot you've ever had. A few weeks later, you go to the dentist for a checkup. He starts to put a mirror in your mouth to examine your teeth, and he says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit." Even though you know the mirror won't hurt, you jump out of the chair and run screaming from the room. When you went to get a shot, the words, "this won't hurt a bit," became a conditioned stimulus when they were paired with the pain of the shot, the unconditioned stimulus, which was followed by your conditioned response of getting the heck out of there. Classical conditioning in action. Operant conditioning explains how consequences lead to changes in voluntary behavior. So how does operant conditioning work? There are two main components in operant conditioning, reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcers make it more likely that you'll do something again, while punishers make it less likely. Reinforcement and punishment can be positive or negative, but this doesn't mean good and bad. Positive means the addition of a stimulus, like getting dessert after you finish your veggies, and negative means the removal of a stimulus, like getting a night of no homework because you did well on an exam. Let's look at an example of operant conditioning. After eating dinner with your family, you clear the table and wash the dishes. When you're done, your mom gives you a big hug and says, "Thank you for helping me." In this situation, your mom's response is positive reinforcement if it makes you more likely to repeat the operant response, which is to clear the table and wash the dishes. Operant conditioning is everywhere in our daily lives. There aren't many things we do that haven't been influenced at some point by operant conditioning. We even see operant conditioning in some some extraordinary situations. One group of scientists showed the power of operant conditioning by teaching pigeons to be art connoisseurs. Using food as a positive reinforcer, scientists have taught pigeons to select paintings by Monet over those by Picasso. When showed works of other artists, scientists observed stimulus generalization as the pigeons chose the Impressionists over the Cubists. Maybe next they'll condition the pigeons to paint their own masterpieces.
Okay, I'm going to play this one. And this is kind of what's going on in our world today. Every bit that is explained in this is exactly what's happened to our society over time. And you wonder, how come people seem a lot more controlled, and how come people want to fight for their individuality and all the things that seems like the government wants to take away or try to mold you into what they want you to do? You're about to find out why. And this also goes on the YouTube streets, and as well as some of the things that we see that other people do. I mean, it's terrible because we get so focused on our own entitlement that we start to diminish our society. And this video is going to prove it.
Presentation was written and narrated by Academy of Ideas. Check out their YouTube channel for more of their videos. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduced them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. According to the psychologist Carl Jung, the greatest threat to civilization lies not with the forces of nature, nor with any physical disease, but with our inability to deal with the forces of our own psyche. We are our own worst enemies, or as the Latin proverb puts it, man is a wolf to man. In Civilization in Transition, Jung states that this proverb is a sad yet eternal truism, and our wolf-like tendencies come most prominently into play at those times of history when mental illness becomes the norm rather than the exception in a society, a situation which Jung termed a psychic epidemic. Indeed, it is becoming ever more obvious, he writes, that it is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself, who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes. In this video, we are going to explore the most dangerous of all psychic epidemics, the mass psychosis. A mass psychosis is an epidemic of madness, and it occurs when a large portion of a society loses touch with reality and descends into delusions. Such a phenomenon is not a thing of fiction. Two examples of mass psychoses are the American and European witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. During the witch hunts, thousands of individuals, mostly women, were killed, not for any crimes they committed, but because they became the scapegoats of societies gone.
Well, don't we see that today on social media? Don't we see that when people flock together, not really burning people at the stake, but they might as well be with their accusations, with their relentless pursuit to get people to see how bad of a person this person is, to try to destroy their moral character, to assassinate their their character, to assassinate, their well-being, their stability, everything like that. It's like it says an epidemic of madness occurs when a large portion of society loses touch with reality and descends into delusion. So the delusion is of society today, whether it be on the internet, whether it be in these streets, in reality, people believe that they're always right and everybody is always wrong, and they're going to fight and even bond together to destroy the ones who they view as the enemy. And this is what this is starting to talk about. And you're going to see how our society is slowly descending into this.
Mad. In some Swiss villages, writes Francis Hill, there were scarcely any women left alive after the frenzy had finally burned itself out. When a mass psychosis occurs, the results are devastating. Jung studied this phenomenon and wrote that the individuals who make up the infected society become morally and spiritually inferior. They sink unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level. They become more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable. And worst of all, crimes the individual alone could never stand are freely committed by the group smitten by madness. What makes matters worse is that those suffering from a mass psychosis are unaware of what is occurring. For just as an individual gone mad cannot step out of his mind to observe the errors in his ways, so too there is no Archimedean point from which those living through a mass psychosis can observe their collective madness. But what causes a mass psychosis? To answer this question, we must first explore what drives an individual mad. While there are many potential triggers of madness, such as an excessive use of drugs or alcohol, brain injuries, and other illnesses, these physical causes will not concern us here. Our concern is with psychological, or what are called psychogenic triggers, as these are the most common culprits of the mass psychosis. The most prevalent psychogenic cause of a psychosis is a flood of negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, that
So, did you hear what he just said? The flood of a negative emotion, the fear or anxiety of what you see every day or hear every day, you become mentally ill. And I know you agree with what I'm talking about because you see it. You see people losing their minds because of the flood of a negative emotion that we have every day. It's almost like they'd rather turn into the negative emotion than turn into a positive one because they are plugged in and they're losing their concept of reality.
drives an individual into a state of panic. When in a state of panic, an individual will naturally seek relief, as it is too mentally and physically draining to subsist in this hyper emotional state. While escaping from the state of panic can be accomplished through adaptive means, such as facing up to and defeating the fear generating threat, another way to escape is to undergo a psychotic break. A psychotic break is not a descent into a state of greater disorder, as many believe, but a
You ask why it happens that way because think about it. It's like he said earlier in this video, he said the masses start to lose their mind with what they follow. But look at that cartoon right there. You see the jab, you see death, you see the COVID, you see news, all the evil of the world, fear, the psychogenic start to play on the mind, and you feel like you're overwhelmed with these emotions of madness and you can't escape them. Everywhere you go, there's something that you're seeing that is triggering you, and it takes a toll on your mental state because you're unable to unplug. Look at that one right there, like that TV. Um, the dude is like literally getting um a box put over his head where they're worshiping this individual, and their freedom is being gone, the reality's gone, all the education. Think about it. All the statues that they wanted to tear down all the things that, all the history that they wanted to get away with getting rid of. Because if we make a society that is not thirsty for knowledge and goes with what we want it to go, then we have control. We're able to jack up the prices. They're going to have to pay it because they are so consumed with the fear that if they don't, they're going to go hungry. They're going to lose this, they're going to lose that. Freedom is not what you're thinking you're losing. You're thinking you're losing control and you're losing your mind. So that's what this is talking about. You become psychotic. Do you ever feel like, man, why can't I think straight? Why am I constantly in a state of panic? Why am I constantly fearful of everything that's going on in the world? How come I can't unplug from all this negativity? Everywhere I turn, there's negativity, and people are flocking to it because they're slowly being desensitized and losing their mind to be programmed to this level, so that you become so psychotic that you don't realize that you're losing all these things that you take for granted: your freedom, your mind, your sanity, your reality. All these things are taken from you. But people are pushing a propaganda, and the more psychotic that you become, or the more unable to break away from the control, you just become deeper and deeper in it. I hope that makes sense.
The ordering of one's experiential world, which blends fact and fiction or delusions and reality in a way that helps end the feelings of panic. Silvano Arietti, one of the 20th century's foremost authorities on schizophrenia, explains the psychogenic steps that lead to madness. Firstly, there is the phase of panic, when the patient starts to perceive things in a different way, is frightened on account of it, appears confused, and does not know how to explain the strange things that are happening. The next step is what Arietti calls a phase of psychotic insight, whereby an individual succeeds in putting things together by devising a pathological way of seeing reality which allows him to explain his abnormal experiences. The phenomenon is called insight because the patient finally sees meaning and relations in his experiences. But the insight is psychotic because it
So think of it like this with true crime, all right? We're talking true crime right now. So we have every case that comes across these streams, people divide, okay? The phase of panic. There's a group that's looking at the positive people over here, and they're looking at, there's no way that this can be going on. There's no way that this happened this way. They must be innocent. They must be guilty. So the psychotic insight makes the person turn on the innocent that they perceive. And they look at it as, like right here in the cartoon, witch, kill them all. Don't you feel that way sometimes in some of these chats and some of these streams? Like you're basically witnessing, it's like nobody wants to disagree with you. You say, yeah, this is right. And you get everybody in the chat cheering, yes, 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 that's right, that's right, that's right. We need to go after this channel. We need to go after this person. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need to go after Bill Thompson. We need to go after Ann Taylor. We need to go out. Koberger's innocent. No, Koberger's guilty. No, Sebastian Rogers was killed by his mother, or he was taken by his mother. No, it's the Proudfoots. No, it's Seth. No, it's this. You see the madness? You might as well see people gathering together and say, kill them all. They don't believe like us, kill them all. They're witches. They're different. Kill them all.
is based on delusions, not on adaptive and life-promoting ways of relating to whatever threats precipitated the panic. The delusions, in other words, allow the panic-stricken individual to escape from the flood of negative emotions, but at the cost of losing touch with reality and for this reason, Arietti says that a psychotic break can be viewed as an abnormal way of dealing with an extreme state of anxiety. If a panic-triggering flood of negative emotions in a weak and vulnerable individual can trigger a psychotic break, then a mass psychosis can result when a population of weak and vulnerable individuals is driven into a state of panic by threats real, imagined, or fabricated. But as delusions can take many forms, and as madness can manifest in countless ways, the specific manner in which a mass psychosis unfolds will differ based on the historical and cultural context of the infected society. But in the modern era, it is
Well, look at all those cartoons right there. They're either blinded by their phones or they're just stuck with their phones. Like in the other one, there's a young kid with no phone. There's an old man with no phone, but he's still stuck in the cycle because he's following the status quo. The other one is like being a puppet, led blindly by whatever you're seeing, whatever you're hearing, and based on the fear of your own perception of reality, you're going to be tied to these. You think you're an individual, you think you're unique, you think that you're this and that and the other. But how many of us cannot go 10 seconds, 20 seconds without our phones? Break your phone today. See how psychotic you become. Lose internet service. Let a social media site go down. How many of you can honestly delete apps that give you anxiety, make you feel, I don't like using the word crazy, but make you feel mad, psychotic? And if you can't, why can't you delete those? Why can't you put your phone in a drawer, turn it off, and go live life to the fullest? I'm not saying that everybody does this, but there's a big mass of people that cannot do this.
the mass psychosis of totalitarianism that appears to be the greatest threat. Totalitarianism, writes Arthur Versluis, is the modern phenomenon of total centralized state power, coupled with the obliteration of individual human rights. In the totalized state, there are those in power, and there are the objectified masses, the victims. In a totalitarian society, the population is divided into two groups, the rulers and the ruled, and both groups undergo a pathological transformation. The rulers are elevated to an almost godlike status, which is diametrically opposed to our nature as imperfect beings who are easily corrupted by power. The masses, on the other hand, are transformed into the dependent subjects of these pathological rulers and take on a psychologically regressed and childlike status. Hannah Arendt, one of the 20th century's preeminent scholars of this form of rule, called totalitarianism an attempted transformation of human nature itself. But this attempted transformation only turns sound minds into sick minds, for as the Dutch medical doctor who studied the mental effects.
So look at that. I am God. I am perfect. More power. While the rest of the world, the ruled, are viewed as disposable. That's why a lot of times, you see certain things going on, and you know what you see. You know there's no way that they're telling you the truth because they're viewing this individual or this situation as a disposable act. If we just get rid of them, we'll just replace them with somebody else younger. You're too old, we need to kill off the old. Replace them with younger generations. That way they can do what we want them to do to make us more money for a long period of time. The intensive transformation only turns sound minds into sick minds. This is our normal. This is when you become sick. Look at how they worship the TV, how they worship the newscaster, whoever, who they view as a perfect person. And let me put it on these YouTube streets again. How many channels do you see that the individual who's streaming is viewed at the know all end all? They have individuals that worship them almost to an extent that they're just throwing money at them. They're being, these individuals are ruling the masses and telling their subservients, I am perfect. Give me more power. Believe in me and what I say and what I say only. Everybody else is wrong. You are an idiot if you think that if you go somewhere else and you get news, then you're an idiot. If you listen to mainstream media, you're an idiot. If you do this, if you do that, you're an idiot. Guess what? Abusive control. And you're viewed as disposable. Because if they block you, if they time you out, if they find, a reason to get rid of you, let's say you've super chatted and you're giving them money and giving them money and giving them money, and then all of a sudden you go against the grain or you start questioning, well, I need to put you in your place, block you, get you out of my chat. We can't have somebody going against me because I am the know-all, end-all of everything. That is this type of power right here. So the more psychotic that you become, the more you believe the psychosis in every aspect of your life. You no longer trust in anything. You become childlike, where you're being led by somebody else's leadership. They're having to tell you what to do, how to do it, when to do it, how long to do it, how much you can have, how much you can make, how much groceries you can have, health care, gasoline, this, that, and the other. It doesn't end.
Of living under totalitarianism wrote, "There is in fact much that is comparable between the strange reactions of the citizens of totalitarianism and their culture as a whole, on the one hand, and the reactions of the sick schizophrenic on the other. The social transformation that unfolds under totalitarianism is built upon and sustained by delusions. For only deluded men and women regress to the childlike status of obedient and submissive subjects, and hand over complete control of their lives to politicians and bureaucrats. Only a deluded ruling class will believe that they possess the knowledge, wisdom, and acumen to completely control society in a top-down manner. And only when under the spell of delusions would anyone believe that a society composed of power-hungry rulers on the one hand, and a psychologically regressed population on the other, will lead to anything other than mass suffering and social ruin. But what triggers the psychosis of totalitarianism? As was explored in the previous video of this series, the mass psychosis of totalitarianism begins in a society's ruling class. The individuals that make up this class, be it politicians, bureaucrats, or crony capitalists, are very prone to delusions that augment their power, and no delusion is more attractive to the power-hungry than the delusion that they can and should control and dominate a society. When a ruling elite becomes possessed by a political ideology of this sort, be it communism, fascism, or technocracy, the next step is to induce a population into accepting their rule by infecting them with the mass psychosis of totalitarianism. This psychosis has been induced many times throughout history, and as Mirlu explains, it is simply a question of reorganizing and manipulating collective feelings in the proper way. The general method by which the members of a ruling elite can accomplish this end is called menticide, with the etymology of this word being a killing of the mind, and as Mirlu further explains, menticide is an old crime against the human mind and spirit, but systematized anew. It is an organized system of psychological intervention and judicial perversion through which a ruling class can imprint their own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those they plan to use and destroy. Priming a population for the crime of menticide begins with the sowing of fear. When an individual is flooded with negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, he or she is very susceptible to a descent into the delusions of madness. Threats, real, imagined, or fabricated, can be used to sow fear, but a particularly effective technique is to use waves of terror. Under this technique, the sowing of fear is staggered with periods of calm. But each of these periods of calm is followed by the manufacturing of an even more intense spell of fear. And on the process goes. Or as Mirlu writes, each wave of terrorizing creates its effects more easily after a breathing spell than the one that preceded it.
Because think about that. How many times do you click on an app, especially TikTok? TikTok is bad about this. I had to stop watching TikTok for a long time because I used to turn on TikTok and it was World War III. It was, you name it. It was all about the world is ending type stuff. And it started talking about nuclear war, start talking about famine, diseases, new strains of uncurable, deadly viruses that kill you 50%, blah blah blah, this, that, and the other. And after a while, man, if you have gotten to that point where you're beat down with such fear and worry, it doesn't matter who you are. Your mind is going to start to betray you because it can't take the stress. It's going to feel like you cannot function. It's going to feel like you're being led by everything other than your own mind. And that's where the madness comes from. That's where the waves of terror, think about it. How many times do we have waves of terror? We have, well, you need to fear this, you need to fear that. And then all of a sudden it dies away and you take a deep breath, you're like, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden, bam, something else hits. Oh, damn, we got to worry about this, we got to worry about this. And then all of a sudden, okay, I'm calm. So you incorporate this fight or flight in every aspect of your life where you become like this individual in this bird cage, locked and bound to your own insanity. Have you ever felt like you're losing your mind? Like you cannot think properly? Like you cannot process things? You're forgetting things? You're feeling like, man, I need to like unhook from reality. It is just too much. Well, if you answer yes to any of those questions, this is what's going on with our world.
Because people are still disturbed by their previous experience. Morality becomes lower and lower, and the psychological effects of each new propaganda campaign become stronger. It reaches a public already softened up.
Well, let me give you an example. School shootings. School shootings is an example. We have a shooting, fear rises. And then all of a sudden, we get the pep talk about the guns are the problem, and this is the problem, and that's the problem, and we need to do that, and mental health is the problem, and this and that and the other. And then they reassure us, well, this isn't going to happen again. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. So we start to feel calm. Then all of a sudden, there's another shooting, and another shooting, until we're trapped into that little box, like that individual right there. And our morality start to suffer because we start to wonder, why should I follow the law if nobody else is? Look at all these abductions, all these murders, these senseless murders that are going on in our world, especially here in the US. For what? It's like the world is a ticking time bomb because the rulers, the more uncomfortable you are, the more control they have over you. and the more psychotic, childlike you become.
While fear primes a population for menticide, the use of propaganda to spread misinformation and to promote confusion with respect to the source of the threats and the nature of the crisis helps to break down the minds of the masses. Government officials and their lackeys in the media can use contradictory reports, nonsensical information, and even blatant lies. As the more they confuse, the less capable will a population be to cope with the crisis and diminish their fear in a rational and adaptive manner. Confusion, in other words, heightens the susceptibility of a descent into the delusions of totalitarianism. Or as Mirlu explains, logic can be met with logic, while illogic cannot. It confuses those who think straight. The big lie and monotonously repeated nonsense have more emotional appeal than logic and reason. While the people are still searching for a reasonable counterargument to the first lie,
Where do we see that at? It says logic can be met with logic, while illogic cannot. It confuses those who think straight. The big lie and monotonously repeated nonsense have more of an emotional appeal than logic and reason, while the people are still searching for a reasonable counter argument to the first lie. This is social media at its best. How many times do you say, well, this is real, this is fact? And you get no response. You get, whatever. But you get somebody lying to you and creating the biggest conspiracy theories and putting all these things, all this nonsense together. The emotional appeal is attracted by the masses while they're trying to counterpart the first lie.
the totalitarians can assault them with another. Never before in history have such effective means existed to manipulate a society into the psychosis of totalitarianism. Smartphones and social media, television and the internet, all in conjunction with algorithms that quickly censor the flow of unwanted information, allow those in power to easily assault the minds of the masses. What is more, the addictive nature of these technologies means that many people voluntarily subject themselves to the ruling elite's propaganda with a remarkable frequency. Modern technology, explains Mirlu, teaches man to take for granted the world he is looking at. He takes no time to retreat and reflect. Technology lures him on, dropping him into its wheels and movements. No rest, no meditation, no reflection, no conversation. The senses are continually overloaded with stimuli. Man doesn't learn to question his world anymore. The screen offers him answers, ready-made. But there is a further step the would-be totalitarian.
Think about that statement for a minute. You can Google anything, right? And now there's artificial intelligence and there's all kinds of things that assist you in doing everything that before you had to question, you had to use your brain in order to do. Now there's no struggle because we get answers instantaneously by the internet, by Google, by AI, by all the, search engines. Not that I'm knocking any of that, but have you ever wondered, is this true? Or you take it as face value and fact because it's on the internet? Do you ever question any of it? And this is true too. How many of you get no rest? You're resting, but you're not sound asleep because your phone is right there next to you going off, vibrating. There's no kind of focus, no reflection on your day, no reflection on your life, no conversations with anybody other than text messages or on social media. And you're continuously overloaded with stimuli, meaning that you feel like your brain is running a million miles an hour, and by the time you get home, all you want to do is go to sleep.
Rulers can take to increase the chance of a totalitarian psychosis. And this is to isolate the victims and to disrupt normal social interactions. When alone and lacking normal interactions with friends, family, and coworkers, an individual becomes far more susceptible to delusions for several reasons. Firstly, they lose contact with the corrective force of the positive example, for not everyone is tricked by the machinations of the ruling elite, and the individuals who see through the propaganda can help free others from the menticidal assault. If, however, isolation is enforced, the power of these positive examples greatly diminishes. But another reason that isolation increases the efficacy of menticide is because, like many other species, human beings are more easily conditioned into new patterns of thought and behavior when isolated. Or as Mirlu explains with regards to the physiologist Ivan Pavlov's work on behavioral conditioning, Pavlov made another significant discovery. The conditioned reflex could be developed most easily in a quiet laboratory with a minimum of disturbing stimuli. Every trainer of animals knows this from his own experience. Isolation and the patient repetition of stimuli are required to tame wild animals. The totalitarians have followed this rule. They know that they can condition their political victims most quickly if they are kept in isolation. Alone, confused, and battered by waves of terror, a population under an attack of menticide descends into a hopeless and vulnerable state. The never-ending stream of propaganda turns minds once capable of rational thought into playhouses of irrational forces. And with chaos swirling around them and within them, the masses crave a return to a more ordered world. The would-be totalitarians can now take the decisive step. They can offer a way out and a return to order in a world that seems to be moving rapidly in the opposite direction. But all this comes at a price. The masses must give up their freedom and cede control of all aspects of life to the ruling elite. They must relinquish their capacity to be self-reliant individuals who are responsible for their own lives and become submissive and obedient subjects. The masses, in other words, must descend into the delusions of the totalitarian psychosis. The totalitarian systems of the 20th century represent a kind of collective psychosis. Whether gradually or suddenly, reason and common human decency are no longer possible in such a system. There is only a pervasive atmosphere of terror and a projection of the enemy, imagined to be in our midst. Thus, society turns on itself, urged on by the ruling authorities.
How many times have we had that happen? The collective psychosis, whether gradually or suddenly, reason and common human decency are no longer possible. In such a system, there is only a pervasive atmosphere of terror and a projection of the enemy imagined to be in the midst. How many times are we told on a daily, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, we need to fear this, we need to get ready for that, we need to start doing this, we need to start doing that? Does that not raise your anxiety? Does that not raise your inability to focus on things you need to do? And just like this clown is sitting on the top of the money, that's what we do. We start to worship money because we give up our freedom and cede control of all aspects of our lives to something greater than is ourselves. And we are forced to become obeying because we feel out of control. We feel that we have no other choice. Society turns on itself, urged by ruling authorities. How many times do people urge you to take a side? Don't let that person do that to you. You need to stand up for yourself against this and you need to get that. But if you stand up against the right thing or you stand up against me, then there's going to be a problem.
But the order of a totalitarian world is a pathological order. By enforcing a strict conformity and requiring a blind obedience from the citizenry, totalitarianism rids the world of the spontaneity that produces many of life's joys and the creativity that drives society forward. The total control of this form of rule, no matter under what name it is branded, be it rule by scientists and doctors, politicians and bureaucrats, or a dictator, breeds stagnation, destruction, and death on a mass scale. And so perhaps the most important question facing the world is how can totalitarianism be prevented? And if a society has been induced into the early stages of this mass psychosis, can the effects be reversed? While one can never be sure of the prognosis of a collective madness, there are steps that can be taken to help effectuate a cure. This task, however, necessitates many different approaches from many different people. For just as the menticidal attack is multi-pronged, so too must be the counterattack. According to Carl Jung, for those of us who wish to help return sanity to an insane world, the first step is to bring order to our own minds and to live in a way that provides inspiration for others to follow. It is not for nothing that our age cries out for the Redeemer personality, for the one who can emancipate himself from the grip of the collective psychosis and save at least his own soul, who lights a beacon of hope for others, proclaiming that here is at least one man who has succeeded in extricating himself from the fatal identity with the group psyche. But assuming one is living in a manner free of the grip of the psychosis, there are further steps that can be taken. Information that counters the propaganda should be spread as far and as wide as possible, for the truth is more powerful than the fiction and falsities peddled by the would-be totalitarian rulers, and so their success is in part contingent on their ability to censor the free flow of information. Another tactic is to use humor and ridicule to delegitimize the ruling elite, or as Mirlu explains, we must learn to treat the demagogue and aspirant dictators in our midst with the weapon of ridicule. The demagogue himself is almost incapable of humor of any sort, and if we treat him with humor, he will begin to collapse. A tactic recommended by Václav Havel, a political dissident under Soviet communist rule, who later became president of Czechoslovakia, is the construction of what are called parallel structures. A parallel structure is any form of organization, business, institution, technology, or creative pursuit that exists physically within a totalitarian society, yet morally outside of it. In communist Czechoslovakia, Havel noted that these parallel structures were more effective at combating totalitarianism than political action. Furthermore, when enough parallel structures are created, a second culture, or parallel society, spontaneously forms and functions as an enclave of freedom and sanity within a totalitarian world. Or as Havel explains in his book, The Power of the Powerless. What else are parallel structures than an area where a different life can be lived? A life that is in harmony with its own aims, and which in turn structures itself in harmony with those aims. What else are those initial attempts at social self-organization than the efforts of a certain part of society to rid itself of the self-sustaining aspects of totalitarianism, and thus, to extricate itself radically from its involvement in the totalitarian system? But above all else, what is required to prevent a full descent into the madness of totalitarianism is action by as many people as possible. For just as the ruling elite do not sit around passively, but instead take deliberate steps to increase their power, so too an active and concerted effort must be made to move the world back in the direction of freedom. This can be an immense challenge in a world falling prey to the delusions of totalitarianism, but as Thomas Paine noted, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph.
I think that's an awesome video. I think it has a lot of valuable insight and information. And if you didn't understand it, I suggest that you go watch it again, because it has so much of what's going on in our world today, not only on these YouTube streets, but is in our real world. Because as sad as it sounds, what we see online is what happens in real life. For whatever reason, people think that they can act the same way they do in real life as they do online. And, you know, it is what it is. One more, and then I'm going to call it a night. I hope y'all are enjoying this. If you understand what I'm talking about or have been presenting up here, please put a 1. And if you've enjoyed it, put a thumbs up. And here's another video about our conformity to conformity about how people follow the group and the masses.
Look at this line. And now look at these 3 lines. Can you tell which of them matches that first line? And how sure are you? Hold that thought and listen to this story, because most people can get this wrong. Once upon a time, on the eve of a major religious holiday, a 7-year-old boy was observing his grandmother as she poured an extra glass of wine. When the boy asked who the glass was for, she said that it was for the prophet. The boy didn't believe her, so his uncle told him to just observe the glass closely. Full of expectation, the boy watched the glass intently, and suddenly he thought he saw the level of wine drop just a bit. In 1951, decades after the incident, our boy became a pioneer in social psychology, determined to rationalize what actually happened that fateful night. Did some of the wine really disappear, or was he made to believe that? To find out the truth, he devised an experiment to investigate whether peer pressure can be strong enough to change our perception and make us believe in things that are not true. Solomon Ash's conformity experiment was conducted with 123 white male college students who were told to be part of a study in visual judgment. Each student was introduced to a group of 6 to 8 other students who were, in fact, actors who already knew what the experiment was about. The group was then gathered in a classroom and shown 2 cards, the first with 1 line, the second with 3 lines on it. Each student was then asked to say aloud which line in the second card matched that first one. The group was seated in such a way that allowed the actors to respond first, leaving the real participant to respond last. For the first 2 rounds, the fake students, also known as Confederates, gave the correct answer, and the innocent student, known as the subject, said whatever he thought to be true. In the 3rd round, the actors began to respond with a clearly wrong answer. For the next 12 rounds, dubbed the critical trials, all the Confederates would give the obviously wrong answer. So the innocent student could either ignore the majority or ignore the truth. So what did the experiment tell the researchers? Upon completing 18 rounds with all 123 subjects, the experiment came to the following conclusion. 23% of the students always gave the right answer. 72% conformed to the majority at least once. And 5% completely succumbed to peer pressure and always gave the obviously wrong answer. Ash's work also showed that if just one other acting student responded correctly, the effect of peer pressure decreased substantially. The experiment also showed that the opinions of 3 peers are enough to influence a student to change his mind. Increasing the number beyond 3 Confederates did not increase the levels of conformity among others. Or, put differently, If 3 people say something obviously wrong and there is no one to disagree with them, many of us agree with the wrong answer and start lying due to our deeply human desire to fit in.
Wow, did you just hear that? Did you just hear that? That was a bomb dropping moment right there. Like if 3 or more agree, the other people start agreeing too, just to be able to fit in. Where do we see that at? Where do we see that at? Yeah.
Since then, Ash's experiment has been successfully replicated many times, and the effect remains significant, especially among women and homogeneous peer groups. In 1955, Ash famously said, "The tendency to conformity in our society is so strong that reasonably intelligent and well-meaning young people are willing to call white black. This is a matter of concern. It raises questions about our ways of education and about the values that guide our conduct." What do you think? Would you have conformed or stuck to the truth? Do you see the Ash's effect in your daily life or in social media? And what can we as adults or educators do to give young people today the strength to stand up and speak the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
All right. There we go. I mean, how many times do y'all see, especially the last two, the first three, people make it through those on the replay, I'll be shocked. But especially the last two. Think about how many times do you see that? You can say anything you want to say. Gosh, my face is all shiny. You can say anything you want to say, and that's you're right. Like I say in this group, we agreed to disagree, right? Not group, this chat. We agree to disagree. But think about whenever somebody intentionally wants to derail the thought process. Yes, I do. They want to intentionally derail the thought process of any kind of logical conversation being done. And that's why I try so hard to keep the chat on topic and also to not have negativity in here, because you could be gaining insight on your own mind, on your own thoughts. And all it takes is somebody to throw a wrench in there to say, well, yeah, that could be it. But what about this? What about this? What about that? What about this? What about this new information? What about this? What about that? Howard Bloom said this, or this other creator said that, or they showed this and that and the other. That's not right what you're saying. Well, what makes you right and makes me wrong? Especially if you didn't get it from your own brain, you got it from somebody else. That's not knowledge. That is repeating somebody's thought. Knowledge is doing your own research and coming to your own insightful thought process to lead you to what you believe. That's why I respect different opinions in here. That's why I respect it. Whenever there's sound, whenever you give me a sound reasoning other than you repeating somebody else's thoughts, I respect the hell out of that. Because you know what? That shows me that you're an analytical thinker and that you're able to see outside the box. And even though you could go different on your thought, you're going to stick to your belief because that's what your heart tells you. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that at all. If more people were like that, we would empower ourselves, and the psychosis that we're experiencing as a nation would slowly start to drift away, because we would be unplugging from what everybody else says. Coulda, woulda, shoulda type stuff, What if? There's nothing wrong with being inquisitive. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. But you know the difference between reality and a fictional event. Or at least if somebody tells you, hey, that's kind of far fetched, bro. Let's look at it again. Could you really see that happening? And you have a constructive conversation about it, and then eventually you're like, well, I still don't see your point, but at least I understand what I'm saying now, what I'm presenting to other people, rather than just trying to stick to a narrative that is not your own. I'm not the moral compass of YouTube. I'm just a online persona that gives my thoughts and opinions and try to educate, not to change people, but give them another option just in case they do want to change, just in case they do want to do something different, Because I believe that there's a lot of individuals that have the capacity to influence other people into greatness. You just have to break free from the masses and use your individuality and greatness to do awesome things. You know, sometimes I'm watching other creators and I'm like, man, you must think people are stupid. Like, you must really think that people do not really pay attention. And then I'm like, did anybody in the chat see what just happened? It's almost like a magic trick. It's like as long as I'm keeping you focused on my hands, you're not seeing the reality of what I'm trying to show you. Try to remember there is a gag order still on the Idaho case. There's inconsistencies in the Karen Reed case. Sebastian Rogers is still missing. What other cases are there? The Gilgo Beach still going on. I hope that at a particular point, instead of taking sides, you stand on your own beliefs, even if you're the only one in the room, not raising your hand towards a dictator. Yeah, I saw that, Paula. I saw that. And that's my purpose. That's my purpose. It's that I hope that I help more than I hinder. You know? That's all I really got to share with you tonight. I mean, last night was kind of long. If you didn't check it out, I mean, there's live music in last night's live. After the homeless part, after the talking about food and everything else under the sun. My channel is a true crime channel, and I'm trying to show you the incorporation of how true crime goes deeper than the surface of a criminal act. And if that's not your thing, I understand. I value your opinion. I value the fact that you may not want to stay and listen to the videos and the thoughts and of myself or other people. I get that. But I also know this about myself. I'm not going to conform to other people's platform just because it's not selling popcorn. You get what I'm saying by that? I'm going to stay true to myself. Just like I began this channel, I'm going to stay true to myself. You know, the real ones will come and they will stay. They might not enjoy every one of the episodes. But like I say to you guys all the time, not every episode's for everyone. I do try to be positive more often than I try to be negative because I believe in a positive mindset. I believe in a positive outcome. Negativity has no place in my world. I try to dispel against it, you know. I don't live in a world where I believe that the bad guy always wins. I believe in a world where, you know what, sometimes the good guy gets the bad guy. And the good guy is actually a good guy. And the bad guy is a bad guy. Whatever that means to you, decipher it. But I really appreciate your time and I really appreciate you guys being here. I hope that you enjoy the channel and um that you that you do find something that makes you come back, even if it's just for one day, you know, whether it be the Serenity Sunday, whether it be the informative life skills that we do on a Sunday evening, you know, or whether it be just raising awareness on certain topics. Whatever it is that interests you, please keep coming back. You know, I believe in every person that comes in the chat that, you know, you guys are here because you enjoy the content, not because of any other reason. You know? So I hope that you did enjoy. Well, stay true to yourself, Twizzle. That's what I like about you is that you can be humble enough to stick to your beliefs and still come to a platform that doesn't necessarily echo your beliefs. And that means that you are uniquely true to yourself. And I like that. I respect that. The same with Heather, the same with Rondi, the same with Paula. I mean, there's a lot of names that are no longer in here that used to come in here. And I hate to see that because, you know, they used to be regulars. And I hope that other people's opinions didn't run them off, you know. But we are, like I always say, everybody's opinion is valid. As long as you don't get belligerent and start attacking each other, you know, your opinions are valid. Or you start attacking me, you know. But like I said, if you're new to watching this or you come across it and you wonder, who is that guy? Who's this 12 gauge guy? I wonder if I should check him out. And you start watching and you still don't understand it, please do understand that I have a dry sense of humor. I have a very perfectionistic mentality where I want to be the best at what I present and what I talk about. And I have very little time for bullshit. You know, that's just as straight as I can say it. You know, um, but till we see each other again, guys. Thank you so much for being here. And if you get this on replay, you might have to watch it a couple times if you don't understand it. Hell, it took me a couple times, and I've gone through psychology each and every freaking semester. It seems like. Um, so don't feel bad if you don't understand it right off the bat. You know, just keep at it because it makes sense in the end. You know, especially in that mental psychosis one. You know, um, let's break the the hoarding mentality where we're all gathering together to attack people, to tear them down, to destroy them. It doesn't matter if the people say they're strong and it doesn't hurt them. There's only so much of that that someone can actually handle. You know? Bullying is ugly. Bullying is ugly. Till next time, guys, gonna ask the maestro to cue that music. Thank you so much for being here. Have a good evening.